continuation of information on plans being developed that could affect the makeup of municipal and county governments in the St. Louis area. A combined chapter and branch subcommittee was created earlier this year and is continuing to stay up to date on any new developments on this subject. We continue to meet and are working to see that Public Works is addressed in any future plans that may come up. The subcommittee members are Ann Lewantola, Mike Bush, Steve Meyer, Eric Landwehr, Jason Dorman, Chris Kruger, John Collins, Alex Samet, and myself. In April, Marius Johnson Malone from Better Together spoke about their proposed plans, which has since been put on hold. Today, Pat Kelly from the Municipal League is here to give us an update on his knowledge of the subject. Pat Kelly is the Executive Director of the Municipal League of Metro St. Louis, a nonprofit, nonpartisan voluntary association of cities, villages, and county governments dedicated to improving the quality of life for area residents. Prior to his role as Executive Director, he was Vice President of Business and Community Development for then Eagle Bank and Trust, and now Enterprise Bank. Mr. Kelly has 22 years experience in municipal government, having served 8 years as alderman and 14 years as mayor for the city of Brentwood. While an elected official, he has served on both Municipal League of Metro St. Louis and Missouri Municipal League's executive boards. He currently chairs the St. Louis Jefferson County Solid Waste Commission Executive Board. He completed the Focus St. Louis Leadership St. Louis program in 2006. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Missouri of St. Louis and an MBA from Webster University. Please help me in welcoming Pat Kelly.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here again and talk a little bit about what was and what isn't today. So again, my name is Pat Kelly, and we represent 84 of the 88 municipalities in St. Louis County and St. Louis City and St. Louis County governments. That doesn't mean we always agree, but that's who are our members. We are actually in our 101st year as a nonprofit organization. We're 26 years or so older than the State League, and I like to remind them of that all the time. So, as you all know, you had a presentation back in April from Better Together, who has since withdrawn their application, and I would say that they are pretty much dead in the water as an organization. But that doesn't mean that something isn't going to come back under a different name and a different type of proposal in the future. But I think the acronym and the name Better Together will kind of go away. The problem or the issue with what Better Together was proposing from the Municipal League standpoint had one critical mistake, or one thing that we just could never support, and that was the fact that they wanted to take it to a statewide election. And the primary reason they wanted to do that was because they knew what they were going to be proposing would not pass in St. Louis City and County. The other major concern, if you actually look at what they were proposing, was the fact that it just didn't work. The bottom line of what Better Together was doing was tax reform. And what I mean by that is they wanted to eliminate income tax. Rex Singfield wanted to eliminate the St. Louis City earnings tax. That was one of his goals in life. That's public knowledge, and that's what one of the primary accomplishments of their plan would have done. And then the other thing that they were going to do was reduce property taxes in St. Louis County by 50%. And they were going to do both of these things in day one of the first year of operation. Okay, so why didn't it work? Well, first of all, St. Louis County is on the record today, going back a few months, but on record that they need a property tax increase over the next couple of years to maintain the current level of services. It's also common knowledge that St. Louis City is struggling. Okay, so under Better Together's proposal, their first year, they were going to, one, eliminate municipal government. That was part of their plan, and the reason they were doing that was because they needed the sales tax revenues from the municipalities in order to manage and run this new government that they were creating. So they left the municipalities, for the most part, they created what they call municipal districts, and their primary function would have been to manage the parks, trash, and then for those 13 municipalities that have fire departments, they could maintain those until they couldn't afford to do that any longer. But under Better Together's plan, that first year they were going to take the earnings tax, $207 million a year, and then for 10 years they were going to dedicate that tax to paying down the city's debt. And once that debt was gone, the tax went away. And again, the first year they're going to eliminate 50% of St. Louis County's property taxes. Well, that's another $40 million. Well, they weren't doing that because it was financially sound. They were doing it because St. Louis City's property taxes were lower than St. Louis County's. So from a political standpoint, in order to get people to support their plan, they needed to equalize those property taxes. So they were going to reduce them in St. Louis County, hoping, again, making them more parallel to St. Louis cities, but then also hoping to gain votes in St. Louis County to support their project. So at the end of the day, that first year, they were going to be taking $250 million out of the pie that was providing services for the residents of St. Louis City and County. Now, most of you in this room know, either being people that do work for cities or working for cities, cities aren't businesses from the concept that they make money. The revenues that cities and governments take in is spent every year providing services for the residents that live in those communities, or capital improvement projects for those communities. For most municipalities, anywhere from 70 to 80% of their expenses is for labor, providing services for their residents. So, the first year they are going to take $250 million out of that pie that was providing services for the residents of St. Louis City and County. The other thing that their plan did was they took over control, they merged all the police departments together, and for you guys, all the public works departments together as well. Well, we had some internal information from Better Together. They were estimating, we never heard anything on public works, but the only way they could make their plan work was to reduce the services that were being supplied. If you're taking that big of a chunk of money out of the equation. We did hear that they were going to eliminate somewhere between 500 and 1,000 police officers the first year. Now keep in mind, in St. Louis County, the municipal police force as a group is larger than St. Louis County's or St. Louis City's police department. There's over 1,300 municipal police officers in St. Louis County. And so, again, in order to make their numbers work, they were going to have to cut that force drastically in order to again, make the numbers work. And so that was going to be reducing the quality of service. They were on the record as saying, when asked, I actually like doing these presentations when Better Together was here, because they couldn't answer the questions that I would ask them when they would make some of the comments that they would make. But they would say, for instance, well, Ladue, the quality of service for police in Ladue isn't the same as it is in Pine Lawn. Ladue doesn't need to have 4 officers on duty every shift. So what they're going to, basically what they're saying is they were going to reduce the coverage in Ladue and then take those officers somewhere else, or just eliminate them, to be honest with you. So we didn't see anything on what they were going to do to public works, but it would have been the same thing. All the municipal public works departments would become part of the new Metropolitan St. Louis Public Works. And they were going to actually take over all of their equipment and all of their buildings as well. Same way with the police departments. And so ultimately they would be reallocating or eliminating those positions in order to make their numbers work. So obviously we were very adamantly opposed to it. Under their own weight, some of the decisions they made, it collapsed in May. There's no way they can bring this proposal back. I have also seen some of the polling information that they had. As bad as Stanger was, with the money behind, or the issues that they were having with some of the allies that they have, with the money they have, I think they would have overcome that. But what happened is their polling showed them that they would not win this election outstate, even with their $25 million campaign. And thank goodness to the opinions and the values of our outstate voters, but a number of their polls showed that they wouldn't be able to overcome that. And I believe that's the real reason that they withdrew their petition, as much as Stanger was in the news. What does the league want? So we initiated in actually at the end of January what's called the Board of Freeholders. And that process is in the Constitution specifically for St. Louis City and County to look at our governmental structure, to put a plan together, whatever that may be, and then ultimately put that plan to a vote of just St. Louis City and County residents. Whatever that issue may be, whatever that plan may be, it has to be approved by a simple majority in St. Louis City and a simple majority in St. Louis County. If one or the other doesn't approve it, it doesn't move forward. How does Board of Freeholders work? Well, once we collect, we need about 2,000 more signatures in St. Louis County to initiate the Board of Freeholders. We have them all collected in the city already, and I won't go into the numbers. But once they're collected and certified, the Constitution's really neat how they do this. They can't ignore the will of the people once this process starts. So once the signatures are certified by the election boards, the county executive and the mayor have 10 days. It says they must appoint 9 members in 10 days. And once those appointments are made and those members are certified, the Board of Freeholders has to have their first meeting 2 weeks after the 30th day after the signatures are certified, so really 6 weeks. They have to have their first public meeting. And that'll be on that first Monday after that at 10 o'clock at City Hall in St. Louis City. It's very specific. They have to do these things. And then they have 12 months to solicit input from the residents of St. Louis City and County and put together whatever that plan may be that they want to present to the voters. It doesn't have to take 12 months, but they only have 12 months. If they don't do anything within 12 months, the process is over. Once they have a plan and they present it to the voters, it has to be public for 90 days before they can set an election date. The reason I bring that up, Better Together made their proposal. Nobody had seen it, not even the businesses and organizations that were supporting it. Nobody knew what was in their plan. They had a press conference at 11 o'clock on a Monday, and they submitted their plan for their initiative petition, or for their petition, at 3 o'clock that afternoon at the state. And nobody knew what was in it. But under the Board of Freeholders, not only do you go through a public process, but then it has to be public for 90 days before the residents actually vote on it. And then ultimately the voters make that decision. So we believe that that's the right process to really look at St. Louis City and County and make that decision whether we should make any changes. So we're very close to that happening. Our goal is to turn in those signatures for both the city and the county on September 3rd, the Tuesday after the holiday weekend. And that if the timetables work right, they should be having their first meeting somewhere around the 14th of October. So I hope everybody will look for that. If you live in St. Louis County and St. Louis City, I hope you will participate and try to see what we can come up with to help stabilize and improve St. Louis City and County. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. So.
Okay. The inside joke for everybody here, I'll watch my tone. A few months ago, we did have Better Together. He did not appreciate my tone, so I'm trying to be very polite.
I watched the presentation, and he got like 30 minutes, so I figured because I'm second, I get like at least an hour.
Sure. Okay, well then.
We don't need that long. No.
Yeah, so we asked the membership to submit questions again, which the committee kind of compiled, and some of them I think are a bit moot based upon the withdrawal of Better Together, but yeah, we'll try to just learn as much as we can. For starters, can you explain the difference between the Missouri Municipal League and the County Municipal League? I think sometimes we use those interchangeably. It's probably about as clear as the difference between the Missouri chapter of APWA and the St. Louis branch of APWA, where we're kind of all both, but maybe you can explain.
Well, I mean, really, we do the same things. We work very closely with the MML. Matter of fact, I was in Jeff City yesterday and we served on a committee forum. During the legislative session, as the executive director, I'm a registered lobbyist, I have to be, but I'm in Jeff City 2 or 3 days a week, working very closely with Richard Sheets. We jointly hire additional lobbyists to support both organizations, but we primarily do the same thing for our members.
Okay. So your understanding is that Better Together, the organization, is dead, or most of us have a sneaking suspicion that they're working on it, and I mean they've said they're going to come back with something, but I think the question is the timeline of when that's going to be. Is it going to be months or years? Is it going to be a different name but the same essential concept? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they need to rebrand if they come back. I think it will be under a different name, same money behind it, but it will be a different name. But regardless, I think what they're doing right now is kind of stepping back, kind of hiding a little bit probably, and really trying to see what happens with the Board of Freeholders. The one thing I think that was very obvious with their plan is that everything they were doing was top down. They refused to let the municipal league and municipalities participate in their process. Literally refused. And so this was an organization was formed. You can tell by their name. They had an agenda from the first day they got started, and it was top down. They took information to support what their end game was from day one, even though it was manipulated in our opinion. And then they presented that, and they were going to put that to the voters of the voters of the state and say, this is the plan and you need to live with it. So it was very top down. In government, if you want to accomplish anything, it's bottom up. You have to involve the residents of your community, whether that be a municipality or St. Louis County or the state. You have to involve them in that process in order to build a consensus. And Better Together did not do that. And I think that's why it was going to fail drastically in St. Louis City and County, and as well as why it showed they weren't going to survive in the state as well.
Have there been any discussions with them between the Municipal League and Better Together since then? I mean, is there anything salvageable that can come out of it, or any of the concepts that Municipal League is like, you know what, that is a good idea, we'd like to take some of your concepts and develop that further? I mean, or any positives that have come out of it from your perspective?
As far as the plan that they presented, I don't think there's anything in there that the Municipal League could have agreed with. It was really a nuclear bomb effect. They were creating a new form of government, and again, repeating myself, not allowing the residents that was going to affect be the ultimate people to make that decision. And just what they were doing by eliminating municipal government, that's what they were doing under this proposal, we just couldn't support that. I think the only benefit that came out of Better Together is the fact that it started some conversations. And I think people are realizing that even though we have 88 municipalities, that as a St. Louis, I don't like to use the word region because region is much bigger than St. Louis City and County. As a region, we're multi-state and we have a metropolitan statistical area. That's our region. But as St. Louis City and County, there are things that we can do as municipalities and county government to work together to help make improvements for our St. Louis.
Okay. In regards to the Board of Freeholders, is there, the process is very well established through the Constitution. Does it provide a necessary end game, or is that all to be determined once the Board of Freeholders convenes? Is it necessarily, okay, the end result is the county, the city becomes part of the county, or are there any predetermined solutions contained within it?
Well, again, through this process, one of the questions Better Together would always ask of the league when we were doing them was, well, what is the league's plan? And what my response to that was, it's not the league's plan. That's why you have a process, again, bottom up instead of top down. What the league believes, or what we've talked about should be on the table and discussed, are things like the city re-entering the county as a municipality, treated no differently than any other municipality. One of the other fallacies that Better Together was kind of spreading, they weren't doing it yet until their campaign got started, but they were saying that if St. Louis City was to go bankrupt, that we would all have to pay for it. Not only us, but the outstate people. That was going to be one of the things they used in their campaign in order to get people to support it. But the truth is, in the state of Missouri, the state and county government has no responsibility for the political subdivisions underneath them. If St. Louis City goes bankrupt, they're on their own. The state is not obligated for any of their debt, just as the county, again, the county isn't now because they're not in our county, but wouldn't be if they were part of St. Louis County. So, they could be move in as a municipality. We could consolidate the county services. I mean, we have 2 circuit courts that are 5 miles apart because counties have to have certain things. We have 2 county jails, basically, in St. Louis. We have 2 recorders of deeds and those kinds of things. So you could combine those and be a little bit more efficient from the county level, and also maybe then with 1 county executive do some things to maybe help St. Louis City.
Okay. What areas does the Municipal League see as the biggest hindrances to growth for the region? The St. Louis area, as opposed to the region.
It's simple. It's population. I mean, that's one of the things that better everybody. We got to shift this pie around with the money and everything. But at the end of the day, it's still the same revenue, right? And you're still trying to provide services. The way to have economic growth is through population growth. And this is why we really need to have these conversations. When St. Louis City succeeded from St. Louis County in 1876, their population was higher then than it is today. Think about that. But St. Louis County isn't much better in that the last big influx in population in St. Louis County was in the 1960s, and it went up from 1960 to 1970, it went up by 270,000 people. Since 1970, the population of St. Louis County has gone up by 40,000. We have stagnant population growth. And that's, people will say, oh, it's urban sprawl, everybody's moving to St. Charles or O'Fallon, Illinois, and so forth. That's not true either, because our metropolitan statistical area is pretty much stagnant as well. You look at major cities like Chicago, they have massive urban sprawl in Chicago, but the inner core is growing as well. And so until we find out a way to actually have population growth in this region, which then bring jobs here and those kinds of things, we're not going to have true economic growth. The other thing is, I think a big part of it, the league's position has been, is what we've been lacking is leadership. When was the last time you saw the mayor of St. Louis or the county executive over a couple of terms say what a great place this is? And really, if you look at what St. Louis has lost in the last 40 or 50 years, we're actually in pretty good shape, for what we have lost. I mean, we used to have 18 Fortune 500 companies downtown in St. Louis City, okay? In the mid-1990s, we lost Southwestern Bell headquarters in St. Louis. They were literally in almost every building downtown. They had some kind of office down there. And I know that because my parents' catering company, we catered for Southwestern Bell for 50 years. And I knew where every one of those offices were. And so, and that's plus all of their other offices throughout, their garages and so forth. Look at the manufacturing we lost in automotive jobs in the last 30 years. Those kinds of things. So on one hand, we've had all these losses, but we've really been able to maintain really a great area when it comes to the quality of life, the cost of living, the fact that it's easy to get everywhere. People complain about traffic in St. Louis, but we really don't have congestion problems in St. Louis. So we need people to start promoting those things in order to attract people and businesses to our region and in order to get that true economic growth.
Okay. I've got a longer question here.
I'll try for a shorter answer.
All right. Better Together pointed out that many struggling municipalities in the county have zero debt because they cannot afford to take on debt for improvements. With a failing infrastructure, these communities are slowly deteriorating as businesses leave and they cannot attract a new tax base. Sadly, these communities often are used to define St. Louis on the national level. In what ways does the Municipal League suggest helping these municipalities improve and thus improve the county as a whole?
Yeah, actually, that I will agree with Better Together on that analysis. But what other areas have done is actually very simple. The county government has then stepped up and let the municipalities in other areas of the country issue their bonds through the county and use the county's rating for their bonds. And it really, that has helped a lot of other areas to help improve and build infrastructure in those ways. And it can be done. Yep.
Okay. Another long one. TIF incentives between municipalities competing for a development create a lower tax base and are used by developers as leverage over municipalities threatening to move next door to a different municipality. They also hurt municipalities that cannot offer the tax breaks and continue to have vacant buildings. Does the municipality have a stance on TIFs and suggestions to reform the system to stop the infighting and better compete for businesses as a region?
So, a couple things. First of all, when I was an elected official in the city of Brentwood, I'm very pro-development. I'm very pro, this is Pat Kelly speaking, very pro use of economic development tools in the appropriate ways. With respect to St. Louis County, the TIF laws were changed actually 3 years ago, and really no TIF can be approved in St. Louis County without approval from St. Louis County government now. The way that they established the TIF laws for St. Louis County and St. Charles County. And the municipalities still have the authority to overrule a TIF commission if they give a negative recommendation, and by a 2/3 majority of the board of the city board, whether it's a council or a board of aldermen. But if they do that, they can only use TIF dollars for demolition and grading. So it really makes a TIF useless for those kind of developments. So really, right now, St. Louis County controls all the TIFs in St. Louis County. But going back to the stories you would hear about businesses moving moving from one community to another. First of all, those maybe 1 or 2 instances of that actually happened, that wasn't initiated by the cities, that was initiated by developers because they wanted to move to a different location. And I think political leaders are being naive if they think Better Together like to use the analogy of town and country when Walmart moved from town and country to Manchester, and no offense to Manchester over here, but when they moved down the street to Manchester, and that had nothing to do with those 2 cities, is because Walmart wanted a better location to be at the corner of 141 and Manchester instead of being at Baxter and Manchester, right? And so if the elected officials are being naive, if they think that Walmart, whether we were one county and one government, didn't want to make that same move, they would still want to do that, and they would still ask for incentives to do that. And so it's just a matter of whether, when you're doing the evaluation, whether the incentive is appropriate or not.
Okay. Switching a little bit to municipal codes. The Municipal League has published that it supports fully standardized building codes for the region. Can you explain what this means for municipal code enforcement and keeping municipal identity?
I actually would have to look and see. I don't remember whether we took that position. But I think there could be some standardization on some of the, I don't think we have actually taken that position. We believe that there's a difference between the building codes and then local ordinances within the communities. And so, yes, could that help some of the things have standard building codes? Most of the cities have adopted or are trying to adopt the 2015 building codes. The issue there is St. Louis County hasn't adopted those yet. And so yes, they can adopt they should all adopt the same building codes, but at the end of the day, those local ordinances with respect to zoning is what we think is important for those own municipalities to make those decisions.
Okay. Switching gears now, time to talk in big picture advocacy. It's something we've tried to key into a little bit more in the past year as a branch and as a chapter. And some of it's come to light because of Better Together, but roughly half of our membership works for cities and must remain apolitical. We cannot support or propose any type of merger. That said, if mergers of any kind are going to occur, we would like a seat at the table so that we can ensure the impacts to public works services and operations are properly considered. How can we best do that as a governmental employee?
Well, you can always do it at the voting box because you still have a right to vote. And some of the requirements are different from within different cities. I actually don't think, if you're off hours, I don't think cities can actually restrict you from participating in that process. But that being said, I think the idea that there's going to be this forced merger or consolidation of municipalities in St. Louis County, I think that threat's gone. That doesn't mean that Better Together is going to come back with something. One of the things that they are talking about internally, and I know this because I have a PowerPoint that they use, they're still thinking about changing the Constitution with respect to the Board of Freeholders. And then to give it more authority, even though it's very broad. The one thing that they could not do, that Better Together wanted to do, 19 of the cities in St. Louis County are charter cities, which are basically have their own constitution in order to manage those cities. Better Together wanted to throw those charters out under their proposal. And that's one of the things they still would like to do if they were able to change the Constitution. Again, that would take a statewide vote. I don't think it's going to happen, but they said that if they could change the Board of Freeholders to give them more authority, they could still consolidate some of those charter cities and other cities in St. Louis County. So I think there's a little bit of a threat, but I don't think it's a reality. So
I think some of the, speaking personally, we sometimes will just run into residents who ask us, what do you think about all this stuff? And we always have to be very careful to say, sorry, I don't have an opinion, which can be challenging, especially when the proposal, would eliminate all of our jobs. So that's the struggle I think that we deal with a lot, and so that's where we're looking for advice of what we can do as individuals, but as an organization. How can APWA get involved? And we've had some meetings with our national as well as far as advocacy and again, what we can and can't do or should do, and the chapter board has had those discussions as well as our committee. But just I guess to wrap up as far as my questions, just any other general advice for us as an organization for advocating for our industry and what we do?
Well, I think you're doing it by just having your regular meetings and getting information out to people, because again, you may not be able to tell that resident when you're on duty what you really feel kind of thing, but the reality of it is when you're talking to your neighbors and friends at home, you can tell them and give them the right information. And I think ultimately, the city managers were under the same kind of issue as an association, both locally and nationally. And they went to their to national organization or international, and and basically talked to them that if Better Together was going to move forward with their proposal, they were going to look at ways that they could help counter the information that Better Together was putting out there, either through supporting an anti-campaign and those kinds of things. So I think what I would suggest right now is just pay attention to what's going on. In your private life, be part of the process. Explain the value of local government and the services that you provide. I always, as an elected official, I always think Public Works was one of the organizations that are departments within the city that the residents tended to overlook. The police and the fire always got all the glory stuff, but wait till that day that their trash isn't picked up, and then the residents are pretty upset. So the things that you do on a daily basis for your residents that would have gone away under Better Together's proposal, like snow plowing and street maintenance and sidewalk repair and all those kinds of things that we do at the local level, it just wouldn't happen. It doesn't happen at the county level. So I think keeping the conversation going, keeping people aware of what might happen is very, very important.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions from the crowd of topics maybe we haven't covered that you have questions out there? We do have a few minutes left yet.
Steve,
Yeah, John.
you mentioned the possibility that the city could come into St. Louis County. What would be the impact on the cities if that happened?
Well, again, ideally it would be none. Our analysis shows that we do have a sales tax pool, that would have no impact from a financial standpoint on the sales tax pool. Unlike Better Together's proposal, which was again a nuclear bomb, and they were going to create a whole new government day one, they could do that under their proposal. Well, it wouldn't have worked but they were going to try. But if St. Louis City were to re-enter the county as a municipality, that would have to be a minimum of a 5, maybe even a 10-year process. It's not going to happen overnight. There's so many things that go into that. Again, I've made it simple by saying, you can merge these departments together. But there's tax implications. There's library taxes in the county. There's library taxes in the city. One's a property tax. One is a sales tax. I mean, all these things need to be worked out and explored. So you would have to have some type of transition committee put together that would really work on that, and it would have to be a process over, like I said, at least a 5-year minimum in order to have that transition work. So, but at the end of the day, I think the only way that the residents of St. Louis City and County would support that is if they're treated no different than any other municipality, that they are a municipality on their own and have to operate as that. So.
Okay, I have one. Do you know who will be appointed onto the Board of Freeholders by Mayor Cruzen or County Executive Page, who each get to appoint 9, I believe? And then, otherwise, do you have any suggestions for how APWA could get someone onto the Board of Freeholders?
So, I forgot to mention, I think I did, the governor appoints 1 member too. There's 19 members. We are in conversations right now with the county executive on recommendations for the Board of Freeholders, at least have some input. It's ultimately up to his decision. I can tell you this right now, we've had more meetings with the county executive since his installation in May than we had with Stanger over the 5 years he was in office. There's a big improvement there from the county government standpoint. I will tell you this too, we have not been able to get a meeting scheduled with the mayor of St. Louis City since May, and even though we try to send requests almost daily to do that. So I'm not sure what direction the city's going to go, but at least the county executive is actually meeting with us and hearing who we think might be some important people. If you are interested in doing it as an association, I would narrow it down to maybe 1 or 2 people you think who would be qualified to do that. It is a commitment. Some of the Board of Freeholders have met weekly for up to 12 months, usually in the evenings. And so it is a commitment. It's a process you need to be part of. That being said, I would select those names and then submit a letter of recommendation to the county executive because he's the one that makes those appointments.
Other questions?
I can just, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so if we don't believe, just based on what you were saying, that developers are making decisions based on municipal boundary lines, what is the municipal league's opinion on why it would be a benefit for the city to re-enter the county?
Well, I think primarily because 1 is the perception, but 2 is again to have 1 county government for St. Louis. Right now, maybe I should have explained that, but St. Louis, when they separated, St. Louis is a county and a city. Okay, and so there's just that inefficiency. Like I said, with the easiest one is the circuit court. They're 5 miles apart. Because a county has to have a circuit court. So St. Louis City's budget for their circuit court is the same as the budget for the circuit court in St. Louis County. Actually, I think it might be a little bit higher. But yet St. Louis County has 3 times as many cases as the circuit court in St. Louis City. Because St. Louis City's circuit court has never changed since they had a population of 700,000. Okay, so I think you could have some of those efficiencies, but I also think that under 1 county, we may be able to, as municipalities and a county government, help St. Louis solve some of their problems through leadership.
Other questions? All right.
Great.
Well, thank you, Pat.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Appreciation of your card for your time. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate that. Thank you. I have a